Independent presidential candidate Robert F. Kennedy Jr. will announce his vice presidential pick in Oakland on Tuesday.
I spoke with Kennedy today about why he chose Oakland for this announcement.
The candidate that we've chosen has ties to the area. I also have a great affection for Oakland. My father campaigned there and got tremendous support in 1968 during his presidential campaign.
Multiple outlets have reported he plans to pick Nicole Shanahan, who grew up in Oakland, is a tech attorney and has been a major donor of Kennedy's campaign. Kennedy would not give us a name. The son of former Senator Robert F. Kennedy and nephew of President John F. Kennedy has been criticized for false and misleading claims about vaccines without credible evidence, but he rejects the claim he's anti-vaccine.
Each one of these conspiracies, when you so-called conspiracy theories, when you deconstruct them, is really about government and corporate officials trying to attack a critic by not having a debate on the science, but rather by saying, oh, he's crazy, he's a quack.
In recent polls, Kennedy Jr. is polling ahead of other third-party candidates with a favorability rating often higher than President Biden and former President Trump. His challenge now is trying to get on states' ballots. In California, his supporters have launched the We the People Party to get on the ticket. In order to be successful, the party must get 75,000 people in the state to re-register with them.
If you're voting out of fear, if you're voting for President Biden because you've been told to be fearful of President Trump getting elected, or the other way, if you're voting for President Trump and really don't want to, but you're just scared of President Biden, that's not how democracy is supposed to work. You should be able to vote somebody who inspires you, somebody who you like.
We will cover Tuesday's announcement when Kennedy reveals his running mate in Oakland.
I want to thank you for your generous contribution to my presidential campaign. Your donation is about casting a vote for a better future for our children, a future where we wind down the war machine and put our country on a path to peace, a future where we end the chronic disease epidemic that is now debilitating half of our children and put all of America back onto the road to good health. A future that puts the American middle class in its proper place as the generator of our economic engine for prosperity and for power. It's about giving our children the same opportunities for dignity and enrichment and prosperity and good health that our parents gave us by protecting our environment, the sacred place, the waters, the rivers, the Purple Mountain's majesty that connect us to our history, to our culture, and ultimately to our Creator. Not surprisingly, corporate interests are not backing this campaign, but because of you, we're showing our strength and our contribution and our numbers. So thank you deeply for your generosity. I promise you that we will put your contribution to good use in taking back our country.
Well, Democrats are in a total panic that a third-party candidate like RFK Jr. could spoil Joe Biden's re-election. The DNC is said to be building a crack team of operatives and lawyers to squash the contenders like a bug, whether it's through dirty opposition research, hello Christopher Steele, or challenging their access to the ballot. Former Biden mouthpiece Jen Psaki says the candidates pose the biggest threat to Biden.
These third-party candidates are a huge, huge, huge problem, and there's a number of them. If you look at RFK Jr., it's the name recognition issue. This is one of the biggest threats to Joe Biden being reelected.
RFK Jr. is also getting on the nerves of the liberal media, the candidate recently declaring the New York Times is a, quote, an instrument of the Democratic Party in this tense interview. Watch.
70% of the people in this country do not want a contest between Trump and Biden. The New York Times is not going to allow those people to get in, those Americans who don't want to see a rerun of this contest. Don't you think they deserve something? And the New York Times is essentially an instrument of the Democratic Party.
So, Jesse, it's interesting that the Party of Democracy has been filing all these lawsuits to keep RFK Jr. off of the ballot for people to vote.
I mean, are you shocked, Katie? These people will stop at nothing. They're taking people's money. They're taking people's homes. They're not even giving this guy Secret Service protection. The CIA framed Trump as a traitor. What else are they? I mean, this is nothing. This is tiddlywinks. What, are they going to have a couple lawyers try to keep him off the ballot? So what? They arrested their opponent. Yeah. That's nothing. They're putting this guy's life in danger. They're putting Trump's life in danger. The Democratic Party does not have any rules anymore. Anything goes. They can call you Hitler. They can smear you as a Nazi. They can frame you. They can plant evidence. They can take everything that you've ever worked for. If I were the Democrats, I'd be scared because he's a threat, RFK Jr. He's peeling votes away from Joe Biden, and they have to do whatever it takes. Whatever it takes, Katie. Look at her eyes. She's capable of anything.
So she had those glasses on, disguised. Jessica, do you want to respond to the accusations being lobbed at your party?
That I'm demonic? No, I'll let that one go for today. But third-party spoilers are a problem for both parties. If you go back to the 90s, Ross Perot, H.W. Bush would have had a very different life if Ross Perot hadn't run.
Okay, and Ross Perot got Secret Service protection.
Way to change the subject.
What about Joe Biden losing
subject
as a result of this? Because the polling shows that actually RFK pulls more from
some of it. Some of it shows that he does hurt Trump as well, and there's crossover. I understand, but what you're seeing play out, and I think it is completely warranted, is PTSD from 2016 with Jill Stein. If you look at the margins in Wisconsin and in Michigan and Pennsylvania, Hillary Clinton, and there are a number of reasons that she ended up losing the election, but Jill Stein being in the race is one of them. And RFK Jr., it's interesting, obviously the anti-vax stuff is way on the other end of this, but has this Green Party history, right, or at least Green Agenda history, and was a great climate activist. The accusations about the New York Times, though, are completely unfounded, and we've talked about this a few times before. Democrats do not think that the New York Times is on our side and can point to a number of stories going back to the Hillary Clinton server story, Uranium One. If you even look at the polling and how they cover it, the New York Times Siena poll, for instance, we did a whole 2 days, right, of cycle on the New York Times Siena poll showing that Trump was doing so much better with Black Americans, with Gen Z voters, that he was somehow within, I think it was a couple points with female voters. And then the breathless coverage of how Biden is too old for this. The Ezra Klein piece came out. That Ezra Klein is at the New York Times. That essay turned into multiple news cycles about Democrats are coming around. They understand that Joe Biden can't do this. That's all our, quote, beloved New York Times. And I'm sorry for RFK Jr. that he doesn't know that there's tape of him talking about being anti-vaccine, talking about policies that are completely out of step with the Democratic Party, to the point that his own family wants to do St. Patrick's Day at the White House and doesn't want to be around him. And they're only going to be upping their campaign against him. And not because we're in a cult, but because he doesn't represent our values.
Well, if you think the New York Times is not nice to Democrats, you should see what they do to Republicans. But RFK's strategy has been not to use the mainstream media, Greg. It's been to go to alternative sources to get more support, even though he has high name ID.
Well, a couple of points. Jessica, Perot did get 19% of the vote, but he didn't get a single electoral vote. So that's something to ponder.
Greg studied.
Yes, I did. This guy's dad and uncle were assassinated. You could argue one by the CIA, and I don't mean the Culinary Institute of America, Shannon. So maybe he might deserve some protection. I mean, it's kind of weird. The reality is, if you have a third-party candidate with some substance, it could have an effect. And I don't know who RFK would actually pull from, because I like him, because he sounds like a Democrat of old. He sounds like he's smart. But you got to leave it to the Democrats. Instead of trying to win at the ballot in November, they're going to try to take the candidate out so people don't have the choice. Why beat him if you can cheat him? I mean, at least the Republicans are okay with choice. The only time Democrats believe in choice is when they deny it to the unborn.
But the Republicans
take that, baby killers.
Don't want no labels.
No, Democrats don't want it either.
I know, but I'm just saying when he says that Republicans welcome it.
Yeah.
Well, no labels.
No one knows.
It's a grifting operation that's raised $70 million and tried to get Larry Hogan on the ballot. They wanted Joe Manchin on the ballot.
Would you rather talk about the CIA accusations or the Culinary Institute of America?
Well, I will say this. I think there's good reason for Democrats in the White House to have consternation and be worried about this. When you have in a single state more than 100,000 people show up to vote uncommitted because they're so ticked off, and thousands, tens of thousands more votes in other states, there is some real angst and real pushback that if people think there's a viable third-party option, that's dangerous for the White House.
Yep.
Click here to subscribe to the Fox News YouTube page to catch our hottest interviews and most compelling analysis. You won't get it anywhere else.
A lot of people who liked the president said that he brought his A game to a State of the Union address. You did not agree. You had said that was a hyper-partisan speech. You're similarly not a huge fan of Donald Trump's. And it looks like those two guys are not keen on debating each other. It might happen, but it doesn't look like it will. What do you think of all of that?
Well, I think we're living at a time when the two least popular mainstream party candidates in the history of our country are running. Both of them would actually win the prize for the least popular candidate in the history of a major political party. 80% of the public says that they don't want a rematch. They want other choices. And, now it's a three-man race. And I would hope that both of these candidates will debate, and we should start talking about the issues that concern Americans, the chronic disease epidemic, the destruction of our soils, the forever wars.
You had a different vision for how you would see the State of the Union.
We published a simultaneous address, my own vision of what the State of the Union is. We're talking about the issues that the major political candidates are not talking about. The fact that we have a $34 trillion debt. In the last 100 days, the debt has gone up by another $1 trillion. That's unsustainable. We're already spending the equivalent to our entire defense budget just on servicing that debt, just on paying the interest of that debt. Within 5 years, half of every tax dollar collected will go towards servicing the debt, and within 10 years, it could be every tax dollar collected. And nobody's talking about this. Nobody's talking about the chronic disease epidemic. When my uncle was president, Neil, 6% of Americans had chronic disease. Today, 60% do. We have an entire generation that is now sick, the sickest generation in the sickest country in the history of the world. And nobody's talking about it.
Let's discuss this and much more with a main player in shaping our potential future, independent presidential candidate Robert F. Kennedy, Jr. It's good to see you, sir.
Thanks for having me back, Chris.
So you have had a dance when it comes to saying things on Twitter or on the internet that people don't want you to say, and things being restricted or shadow banned or whatever you want. What do you think people need to understand about the state of play with where law and culture should meet on what's being called content moderation on social media?
Well, I have a case now that just won in the Court of Appeals called Biden versus Kennedy, Kennedy versus Biden, where I successfully sued the president for censoring, for ordering the social media sites to censor me and to deplatform me 37 hours after he took the oath of office, swearing to uphold the Constitution of the United States. President Biden had people within his White House staff contacting Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, Google, the other social media sites, and pressuring them to remove my posts. And my posts, they said originally, well, it's because he's posting misinformation, but they were not able to point to a single post that I had posted that was actually factually erroneous, and they had to make up a new word called malinformation, which is information that is accurate but is nevertheless inconvenient to the government. And so you had the U.S. government doing something unprecedented, which is to pressure social media sites, to censor political speech.
I put up the tweet what it was for people, Bobby, just for people at home. One, Bobby's referring to what this case is. It's before the Supreme Court right now, what the line is between persuasion and coercion. And here is his tweet. Now, look, the criticism is that Hank Aaron's family said it wasn't about COVID, his death, that it was natural causes. But be that as it may, whether it's right or wrong, it's about whether the idea has a right to be aired and vetted by the public or not. Do you believe there should be any limitations beyond what is already legal, like kiddie porn?
Well, I don't think the government should be involved. You know, the social media sites are welcome to have programs or processes or community rules that where they can censor stuff. But once the government gets involved, then the First Amendment is implicated. And you know what the government was doing with the social media sites is it was threatening to revoke their Section 230 protection. As you pointed out, Section 230, if I come on your show, Chris, and I say something defamatory about somebody, that person can sue not just me, but your television show. Right. Or when I publish something in the New York Times, every time I publish something, a lot of lawyers would come in and vet it, and I'd spend an hour or two on the phone just for an 800-word op-ed. So the social media sites, you know, when it was evolving, when the legislation was being passed, if we can't do that, we cannot have lawyers vet every single post that goes up on our site. Right. And Congress agreed, and they said, you're not that guy, you're a carrier. So we're going to give you immunity where you can still sue the person who defamed you, but you cannot sue the company. Well, what the Biden administration was doing was it was saying to Mark Zuckerberg and others, we are going to revoke that protection. And Mark Zuckerberg said, yeah, that would be existential for us. It would destroy our company. So, you know, of course, the social media sites are going to do what they say now. Social media sites ought to be able to police their sites, to take off kiddie porn, to take off advocates of violence or racism or whatever. But once the government gets involved and tells them what to do, then, you know, we have a First Amendment problem, and that should never happen.
Hey, thank you for watching. Please go to newsnationnow.com, newsnationnow.com, and you can find News Nation on your television provider. And don't forget to click the red subscribe button down below. Then you will get more of News Nation's fact-driven coverage.
Since I'm running for President of the United States, I want to share with you a piece of my fundamental philosophy of governance. Right now, an extremely important case is awaiting decision by the Supreme Court. It's called Murphy versus Missouri. Basically, it's about whether the government can outsource censorship to social media platforms. We now know that both the Trump and Biden administrations leaned on Twitter and Facebook to force them remove or suppress specific people and posts that question government policies. Both Presidents Trump and Biden set up an entire system to funnel censorship requests from government agencies to those platforms. An entire army of agencies had access to the White House's censorship portal, including the CIA, the FBI, the IRS, the CDC, and White House political directors. All of them were censoring information that was factually accurate, but nevertheless inconvenient to the Trump and Biden administrations, which did not want the public to know the truth. I have a special interest in this case because I was one of the first people censored, and I was also one of the original plaintiffs who brought the suit in the first place. That's because the White House was ordering social media platforms to censor me, despite the fact that everything I posted was factually accurate and cited peer-reviewed publications or government databases. But there's a lot more at stake here than my own constitutional rights. This case is about the kind of nation that we want to live in. Unfortunately, democracy alone is not enough to guarantee our freedoms. We now know that democratically elected governments are perfectly willing to take away our rights if they think that they can get away with it. That's why the founders put constitutional limits on what the government can and cannot do. And the most important of all these limits is the First Amendment guarantee of freedom of speech. A government that can silence its critics has license for any atrocity, including the suppression of all of our other constitutional rights. Without free speech, none of our freedoms will last very long. Remember, both Presidents Trump and President Biden, Republicans and Democrats, have all failed to safeguard this most basic freedom. That changes the moment I become president. If you share that priority, then please help me get elected by donating to my campaign today. The last two presidents added $8 trillion to the deficit that our kids now have to pay back. We're now at $34 trillion. And of course, you can fake a strong economy by flooding it with cash. But somebody's going to pay for our joyride. And who is it? It's our kids. We've completely and utterly betrayed this generation of kids. We've loaded all of our problems onto them. And already the debt service is now larger than our military budget. And then every time that interest rates go up, the debt service goes up. Oh, if you go from 3% to 8%, 7%, the debt service more than doubles. And we've been artificially keeping the interest rates low. When I bought my first house, the interest rates were around 18%. Imagine that. If it went up to 18%, the service of the debt would be larger than our entire budget. Literally 100% of every dollar in taxes would go to servicing the debt. That's where we're heading. And does anybody think that's a good idea? And does anybody have any plan, any of the politicians you listen to, have any plan about how to avert that calamity? Freedom of speech, Hamilton, Madison, Adams said that they put freedom of speech in the First Amendment of the Constitution because all of the other rights depended on it. A government that has the capacity to silence its opponents has the power to commit any kind of atrocity. And we saw during COVID that, beginning around late January, early February, the government began actively promoting the censorship of speech on social media. That was something new in the American experience, and I just won a case against President Biden because of what he did during that period, Biden versus Kennedy, which is now about to go to the U.S. Supreme Court. As soon as they figured out that we were going to put up with that there was no uproar in the media, they did go after all of the other rights in the Constitution. They closed down every business in this country with no due process, no just compensation in violation of the Fifth Amendment. They went after the other two planks of the First Amendment, which were the first one after freedom of speech and freedom of worship. They shut down every church in our country, again, with no scientific citation, no environmental impact statement, no due process, no public hearings, no notice and comment rulemaking, all of the safeguards of the democratic process that I've sued for 40 years. I've litigated on those issues when government and agencies and corporations failed to go through that process. And in this case, there was nothing you could do about it because it was all protected by Operation Warp Speed.